So recently on my Twitter feed, I've been seeing a lot of information about Borderlands 4 and how unoptimized it was for PC players in particular. And then I thought to myself initially, it's just, PC gamers just, complaining about a new release. But then I got into benchmarking this game and wow, it really is that bad, to the point where I decided to get, I guess, the best next thing to compare it to, and that was Borderlands 3, just to give you guys a breakdown of how much, I guess, or not so much, extra visual fidelity you're getting out of Borderlands 4 versus 3, but also the performance figures at these particular resolutions and settings. And for today's comparison, I decided to test with an RX 9060 XT 16GB and an RTX 5060 Ti, two pretty mainstream graphics cards, to show you that not only is the game, just in terms of graphics for the FPS, really bad, but as I was benchmarking the game, there was just some other things that really put me off. For instance, the audio of the footsteps versus the body movement. Like, who made this game? Like, who designed this game inside Gearbox? I'll let you guys take a listen to the footsteps versus the body movement of the main character. So do let us know in the comments, is it just all in my head here, or is this body movement of the person moving and the footsteps that you're hearing just completely desynced? To me, I'll give you guys an example of how my brain is processing this right now when I'm benchmarking. And so basically this is meant to be what they call a AAA title. In other words, it's a big developer called Gearbox. They're using the Unreal Engine 5. It's basically meant to be the absolute peak for PC game. It is meant to be worth your money, except it does all the opposite. It disappoints. It's not good value for money in its current state, especially with like audio cues just being off, like some of the basic things. But then if we look at the performance figures, it gets even worse. And a lot of people are just putting the blame on Unreal Engine 5, but here's a funny thing. I've looked at Unreal Engine 5 in the past, whether it's Fortnite or whether it's a recent example I did check out was Hellblade versus Hellblade 2. And there was some big differences between the Unreal Engine 4 and Unreal Engine 5. Though this time around, when we look at the performance figures, especially versus the visual fidelity, we are definitely missing out. But we'll talk about the performance figures right after today's video sponsor. Do you need to get Windows activated and don't want to spend stupid amounts of money on a key? Well, if that's you, then today's video sponsor, SCD Keys, has you covered. For as little as $21 for Windows 11 Pro or $13 for Windows 10 Enterprise, you can get activated instantly. And also, don't forget to use the coupon code BFTYC for a big juicy discount. Links in description below. So picture this, you've just gone to the store, bought yourself a brand new RTX 5060 Ti, you get that thing out of the box, you're going to crank up some games, especially some AAA titles in 2025, and then you go to 1080p settings, and you just say you want to play on the max graphical settings. You think your above average 5060 Ti graphics card is going to do a pretty good job here, and then bam, you get slammed with under 40 average FPS. Not only that, if you're on the AMD card, you're doing a little bit better, but you're doing 45.7 average FPS. And then if we go back to Borderlands 3, so you're thinking, man, whoa, this game, it doesn't look that much better than Borderlands 3. Like Borderlands 4, what's going on here? I thought I was getting much higher FPS in Borderlands 3 when I played that back in the day. And if that's what you're thinking, you'd be correct. Because here's where we tested out the RTX 5060 Ti on the max graphical settings. That's a badass quality on Borderlands 3, and we got over 150 average FPS. And then on the AMD card, we got close to 150 average FPS too. And the 0.1% lows were much better. And so for an FPS title, this is, I guess, what a lot of gamers would expect, right? They want a smooth experience. For me personally, when I'm playing FPS, I do love to get over 120 average FPS. It's my sort of sweet spot number. And then for RTS games, say for instance, games like Warcraft 3 that I play regularly, or say Age of Empires 4, I don't really care. I can deal with 60 FPS. It's not so much a problem. Even MOBAs to a point. I don't mind 60 FPS. But for first-person shooters, I definitely like my FPS to be above 120. And so it's easily achievable in Borderlands 3. But then if we look at Borderlands 4, it's actually a mission to get 120 FPS. Even at 1080p, if we go to the lowest settings possible here, we're looking at 104.5 average FPS on the 9060 XT, and then we're looking at 102.7 on the 5060 Ti. And the 0.1% lows, there's a bit of variance there. AMD does seem to be faring better out of the gate for this particular title. But if we look at the 1080p low numbers on Borderlands 3 for these two cards, if you like max FPS, you're just going crazy. In fact, it's making the game have a stuttering problem when the FPS gets too high, because there's a FPS limit in this game of 300, but when I was looking at my benchmark numbers, the maximum frame rate can spike over 400 momentarily, and that essentially then has a counter throttling effect, and that's what's causing sometimes the pretty bad 0.1% lows. But regardless of that, we're looking at a game you can get much higher FPS if you want to with Borderlands 3, but then we compare that graphical fidelity, we're looking at essentially a game that doesn't look a whole lot different. And really, to show you guys the differences and showcase what I mean, we're looking at 4K now, where with Borderlands 3, we're getting over 100 FPS on both the 9060 XT and the 5060 Ti. This is native settings. But then if we use Borderlands 4 low settings natively, we're struggling to get over 35 average FPS. In fact, the 5060 Ti does 35.5 and the 9060 XT does 36.6. So this really leaves you in a field of you have to turn on upscalers to be able to play this game at higher resolutions. And even then, at 1080p, the game doesn't look great at all for a game that's released in 2025. And here's another thing as well with these problems that we talked about too. We talked about those footsteps being desynced before, but here's another thing I noticed with this particular game was that in the dark holes, you're thinking, well, it's Unreal Engine 5. They've got, the Lumix technology where they can have lighting effects and do all these fancy things with this new Unreal Engine 5 over Unreal Engine 4. But it looks like they've just copy-pasted the Borderlands 3 assets from Unreal Engine 4 and haven't really done any optimization at all for Unreal Engine 5. And how I could tell here was with the holes where there's just completely dark. In Borderlands 3, it behaves exactly like it does in Borderlands 4. And that is, there's no extra lighting when your gun goes off. There's no reactions in the environment. And the Unreal Engine 5 is actually that's its strong point, is it can do approximate lighting effects really well. I actually checked this out in a recent video where I compared the Unreal Engine 4 to the Unreal Engine 5. And in other examples like Hellblade versus Hellblade 2, there was a massive difference in graphical fidelity. And the FPS wasn't that bad at all, especially given the lighting that was in Hellblade 2. So they did a pretty good job when they made that game. So Hellblade 2 was a much better implementation of how you can utilize Unreal Engine 5 properly. And then if we look at Fortnite, for instance, that used to be on Unreal Engine 4. When it went to Unreal Engine 5, it was doing a lot better. And even now, it plays really smooth, and it's actually a pretty solid game in general. So a lot of people complain about Unreal Engine 5. I don't think it's Unreal Engine 5 per se that's the problem here. I think it's the developers essentially just copy-pasting things and really not spending their time optimizing the game in Unreal Engine 5 to make it smooth for PC gamers. And we can see this not only in the FPS discrepancies here between Borderlands 4 and 3, but also the graphical fidelity is really not anywhere near 3 times better. In fact, I'd probably peg it down to around 50% better at max when I'm looking at 4K native settings. But even then, this is where it gets a bit sticky, because if we look at these 4K numbers, we can see the FPS is basically going up threefold, just like it was at 1080p, whether it's low settings or whether it's badass settings. But keep in mind, on the badass settings, here was another problem, was that the FPS was so low that it was just a slideshow. On both the 9060 XT and the 5060 Ti, we're getting 12.9 average FPS and 11.7. And then for the Borderlands 3 numbers, we're getting still over 46.3 and 47.8. So it was still barely playable on Borderlands 3. This is 4K, just max native resolution. But then Borderlands 4 was just completely unplayable. In fact, it got even worse, right? We're looking at nearly then a fourfold increase in FPS on both these cards when it's 4K badass settings on Borderlands 4 versus 4K badass settings on Borderlands 3. So as we whack in higher graphics settings and we put in a higher resolution, the cards just really start to scale off in a bad way versus Borderlands 3. And that is, you're losing even more efficiency from the cards themselves versus the game engine, which really is sad to see with Borderlands 4. And again, having a studio with all this experience and all this sort of expertise, you would think they would have done a better job. And especially for me personally, I thought maybe someone there would have played through the game and at least said, hey, the audio on the footsteps just doesn't match the movements. Surely we could fix this before we release the game. Though here's where things get worse, and that is when PC gamers were furious about this game and saying, look, it doesn't play well for a game in 2025, they went to Gearbox Software for answers. And here's where the CEO essentially just told the PC gamers, look, turn on the upscaling. That'll fix everything. And then there's some other responses as well that basically this is like an RPG kind of shooter. It's not a competitive online title. You shouldn't expect high FPS. But then I guess the one that tops the cake is if you just don't like the game, just get a refund. So, I mean, really, like when it comes down to it, it's a first-person shooter that looks really similar to Borderlands 3, yet the performance is just really choppy. In fact, as I was playing through the whole first level, there was one part of the game where the FPS just suddenly like dropped off a cliff and halved for no reason at all. And then it magically went up. And so it's things like these that really just show that the game is not just unoptimized, it just hasn't really been properly tested in terms of beta tested or quality testing. And so for me personally, when I look at a game like this, it feels like what was the beta testing team doing? Or did they take a holiday or something? And I guess in the form of Borderlands 4, my biggest amount of feedback here was, do what Battlefield 6 recently did. I mean, EA kind of turned around their reputation a little bit, and they've had a track record for doing some horrible PC game releases, and they've kind of got it right with Battlefield 6. I mean, I guess the response there was, hey, the game plays pretty well, except besides all the cheaters that were in Battlefield 6. But ultimately, when we look at Borderlands 4, it's like maybe next time around, try and open this game up to, I guess, beta or even alpha testing to get things like this sorted very quickly, and I guess try and iron out some issues with the game, because it's not just the performance that's doing it for me here. It's also those just attention to detail things like the footsteps and water and the reflections and just things like that just being very similar to Borderlands 3. And then, of course, coupled in with the tanking of the FPS, it just makes it so that it's just not an enjoyable experience. I'm actually playing through Borderlands 3 again going, yeah, I kind of would rather play Borderlands 3 than play through Borderlands 4 at this point in time. Even though the skill tree and everything looks pretty cool, it's just, for me, the audio when I'm trying to play through the game and the footsteps are desynced from the character's body, it's just triggering me. Like, I don't know, I'm usually not the type either to go OCD over things either. So that was a bit of a weird one. The final point we'll touch on here is those upscalers. And this is where, if you want to play Borderlands 4, you are definitely, in my opinion, going to want to turn on the upscalers. And here's where, because it's Unreal Engine 5, it does have the TSR built in. That's Epic Games' own temporal upscaler. It does a very good job all round on their own engine. And I think you can't go wrong in terms of getting more performance out of your cards. For instance, if you're going from 4K native to 4K TSR balanced, you'll be nearly doubling your FPS with the RX 9060 XT, and same with the 5060 Ti. However, if you want the best visual fidelity, the best visual experience, then I'd definitely be, if you're on the RX 9060 XT, turning on FSR, or then if you're on NVIDIA, turn on DLSS. Now, both these settings on balanced did a really good job in terms of giving a solid uplift in performance, though in the case of DLSS in particular, I believe the game just looked better than it did natively. And this is a bit of a weird one because I have seen this as well in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, where the DLSS in particular, they call it the K update. It's doing a phenomenal job of giving a performance uplift, but also even improving visual fidelity. But that being said, I think the saddest part of all this is developers taking shortcuts, not optimizing the games properly, and then relying on upscaling technology, and even then, things like frame generation, to say, hey, just turn these things on, get more FPS, when it comes down to the fact that you should be optimizing your game as best as you can first, and then people say, for instance, imagine if the game had doubled the FPS, and then you could turn on the upscalers, and you could be getting maybe 150 average FPS with the 9060 XT at 4K upscaled. I think that would be pretty cool. That's the scenario that a lot of, I guess, PC gamers might have been hoping for with Borderlands 4. Instead, they've got a low base frame rate to begin with. And the scariest thing there is that if the frame rate, as we talked about before, is too low, then even if you upscale it, you're going to get, especially with frame generation, you're going to get a lot of those bullets still registering and not firing properly. So the upscaling is only a band-aid to a bigger problem that exists, and this is actually not just in relation to Gearbox software. We're seeing a lot of other developers do this as well, just releasing completely unoptimized games where they could have just spent a bit more time, really made something out of it, and then I guess you utilize those extra fluff technologies from NVIDIA and AMD and even Intel with XS to get more FPS. But as it stands, it seems like the developers are just rushing through the games as quickly as possible and then just relying on these technologies to get and give PC gamers a better experience, when I just think that's not the way, especially when, in this case with Borderlands 4, we look at the game versus Borderlands 3 and it's just, I'm having a hard time seeing where the big improvements are in terms of graphical fidelity, especially 6 years later. And the worst part of all this is that at the time, an RTX 2060 Super, but then if we compare that 2060 Super to what's the mid-range now, the 5060 Ti and the RX 9060 XT, that's just showing that, okay, well, now you have to turn on these upscaling technologies to even be able to really just play the game with a decent experience, which is kind of sad. And I guess I never thought PC gaming would come to this, especially when Borderlands 3 was released. And speaking of Borderlands 3, that game, it doesn't have any inbuilt sort of upscalers in it. It's just got your natural resolution slider and that's it. Anyhow, that is all for today, guys, with the Borderlands 4 release. I guess this time around, all those people on Twitter, that especially all the people on my feed that were just like telling me how bad it was, they were right. It really is that bad. Anyhow, hope you enjoyed the video, and I guess if Gearbox software, in their wisdom of looking back on what's happening here, you just have to break it down and analyze it and say, hey, the game could use some improvements. It just, come out and say, hey, we released a sloppy game and we're going to do better. And actually, in the next few months, we're going to knuckle down on just fixing all these optimizations. And when Borderlands 5 comes out, we're going to release an absolute winner. That's all they need to do, really. I think that's all. PC gamers are pretty forgiving. But, I mean, if you're sort of meant to do one thing and you go the other way and just tell people to turn on upscalers and say we don't care, essentially imply that you don't care, then I guess people are going to turn elsewhere and just, I guess, like me, go back to playing older games on PC. Anyway, guys, with all that out of the way, I'm going to check myself out of here. Do let us know in the comments section below what you think of the release of Borderlands 4. Are you going to be buying it, or are you going to be returning it like the CEO suggested? And with that aside, love reading your thoughts and opinions, and I'll catch you in another one. Peace out for now. Bye.